Captain Reed of the Galactic Confederation fleet stood before the massive viewscreen, watching as the alien armada approached Earth's defensive perimeter. The Drakari had conquered 17 systems in the past decade, their military might unrivaled, across known space. Their soldiers were bred for combat, towering over humans with exoskeletons that could withstand standard plasma fire. "How many ships?" Reed asked, his voice steady despite the tension knotting his stomach. 87 capital ships, sir. Conservative estimates put their ground forces at over 2 million combat units, Lieutenant Gray replied, her fingers dancing across the tactical display. The Joint Chiefs had already determined that Earth's combined military forces couldn't hope to match the Drakari in direct combat. Humanity's soldiers, brave as they were, would be slaughtered if they attempted a traditional defense. Admiral Watson's weathered face appeared on a secondary screen. "Captain Reed, our regular forces will engage their vanguard to buy time, but we need to activate Protocol Omega immediately." Reed nodded grimly. "The engineers have been notified, sir. They're assembling at the designated facilities." Protocol Omega wasn't a military operation, not in the traditional sense. It was the reason the Confederation had survived 3 alien invasions over the past century, when other, more militarily advanced civilizations had fallen. At the Massachusetts Institute of Technology bunker complex, Dr. Alan Foster pushed his glasses up his nose as he studied the schematics before him. Around him, 37 of Earth's most brilliant engineers and applied scientists worked with focused intensity. They weren't soldiers. Most had never fired a weapon in combat. But throughout human history, engineers had always been humanity's secret weapon. "The Drakari ships use a quantum lattice for their shield harmonics," Dr. Foster explained to the assembled team. "Conventional weapons can't penetrate them. But if we can create a cascading resonance, we'd need to match the exact frequency," replied Dr. Winters, a woman whose innovations in particle physics had revolutionized space travel. "And they'll be randomizing it." Dr. Foster smiled thinly. "That's why we're going to build a frequency-seeking missile system that adapts faster than their shields can change." In orbit above Earth, the first salvos were exchanged. Human ships erupted in silent explosions as the overwhelming Drakari forces pushed forward. The soldiers fought bravely, buying time with their lives. But in labs across the planet, engineers waged a different kind of war. They didn't fight with courage or martial prowess. They fought with ingenuity, with the accumulated knowledge of thousands of years of human innovation. In the Antarctic Research Facility, Dr. Phillips activated the experimental gravity manipulation device that would turn the aliens' own armor against them, crushing them under amplified G-forces. In Bangalore, a team led by Dr. Mehta worked feverishly to reprogram a fleet of mining drones into autonomous weapons that could identify and target the aliens' command structure. And in the underground facility beneath MIT, Dr. Foster watched as the first prototype of his adaptive missile rolled off the assembly line, the culmination of 2 decades of theoretical work compressed into 18 hours of desperate innovation. The Drakari commander, viewing the pathetic, human resistance, allowed himself a moment of contempt. These humans fought well for such fragile creatures, but their defeat was inevitable. His species had never lost a war. He didn't know what humans throughout history had learned the hard way. Soldiers win battles, but engineers win wars. The Drakari landing ships breached the atmosphere 48 hours after the space battle began. The human military had fought valiantly, but was ultimately overwhelmed. Now the ground invasion had commenced, with dropships descending on major cities across the globe. In London, Colonel Marcus Barnes watched the alien troops deploy with mechanical precision. The Drakari moved in perfect formation, their chitinous armor gleaming in the morning sun. Each soldier stood nearly 8 feet tall, armed with energy weapons that could vaporize a human with a single shot. "God help us," Barnes whispered as he coordinated the evacuation of civilians. The first engagement occurred in the ruins of downtown Sydney. The Australian Defence Force had established defensive positions, but their weapons barely scratched the Drakari armor. The battle was brutally short. Within hours, Sydney had fallen. Similar reports came in from Tokyo, Cairo, and Rio de Janeiro. Conventional military tactics were failing everywhere. The Drakari's battlefield superiority was absolute, or so it seemed. In a fortified bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, Tom Wright, a civil engineer who had spent his career building bridges and tunnels, now directed a different kind of project. He hadn't held a gun since basic training 20 years ago, but his understanding of structural principles made him more dangerous than any soldier. The subsonic resonators are in position beneath their main landing zone, Wright reported to the Joint Chiefs via encrypted channel. We've analyzed their exoskeletons and found a structural weakness at the molecular level. Admiral Watson nodded on the screen. Will it work? In theory, Wright replied. Their armor uses a crystalline lattice structure similar to diamond, but with subtle imperfections that should propagate under the right frequency. At precisely 0300 hours, Wright activated the network of devices his team had planted beneath New York's Central Park, where the largest Drakari force had established their command center. The resonators emitted no sound perceptible to human or Drakari ears, but deep within the crystalline structure of their armor, microscopic fractures began to form. The Drakari commander Krell was in the middle of planning the next day's assault, when his lieutenant's armor suddenly shattered like glass. Within seconds, the same phenomenon spread throughout the command center. Krell watched in horror as his invincible troops collapsed, their protective shells crumbling to dust. Simultaneously, in orbit, the first of Dr. Foster's adaptive missiles found its target. The projectile analyzed the Drakari flagship's shield frequency, matched it perfectly, and slipped through as if the barrier didn't exist. The explosion crippled the vessel's propulsion system. In Bangalore, Dr. Mehta's reprogrammed mining drones swarmed a Drakari troop transport, their industrial cutting lasers, designed to slice through asteroid material, making short work of the alien hull. The Drakari had never encountered this kind of resistance. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and superior technology, but they were discovering what many aggressors throughout human history had learned. When backed into a corner, human engineers became the most dangerous beings in the universe. Admiral Watson watched the tactical displays as the tide began to turn. It wasn't the courage of soldiers that was saving Earth, though that courage was real and valuable. It was the collective genius of thousands of engineers and scientists adapting civilian technology and creating new weapons from theoretical concepts. The Drakari are pulling back from New York and Beijing, Lieutenant Gray reported, surprise evident in her voice. Reed nodded. They're learning, but they don't learn fast enough. In his laboratory, Dr. Foster was already working on his next innovation. The real battle had just begun. The Drakari retreat was temporary. Commander Krell had underestimated human ingenuity, but he wasn't defeated. 3 days after the initial setback, the aliens returned with modified armor and adapted tactics. Their new exoskeletons featured shifting resonance patterns that rendered Wright's subsonic attack useless. They've countered our first wave of innovations, Dr. Foster announced to the assembled engineers at the Emergency Global Conference. Holographic representatives from labs around the world flickered in the secure meeting room. But that's expected. This isn't a single battle, it's an arms race. Dr. Lisa Murray, formerly the head of R&D at a robotics corporation, stepped forward. My team has repurposed our construction nanites. They're now programmed to target the specific molecular structure of the Drakari technology. Murray wasn't a weapon designer. Before the invasion, she had been developing microscopic robots for building structures in environments too dangerous for human workers. Now, those same nanites were being weaponized. In Chicago, the Drakari had established a forward operating base. They had learned from their earlier defeats and kept their ships in constant motion to avoid targeted strikes. What they didn't account for was that the city's water supply had been seeded with Murray's nanites. When the aliens processed the water for their own use, the microscopic machines infiltrated their systems. Within hours, weapons began to fail. Vehicle engines seized. Communication arrays went silent. The Drakari soldiers, trained to fight with technological superiority, suddenly found themselves with malfunctioning equipment. The Chicago militia, though outmatched physically, seized the opportunity and reclaimed the city block by block. Meanwhile, in orbit, the space battle had evolved. Dr. Foster's adaptive missiles had forced the Drakari fleet to constantly shift their shield frequencies, draining their power reserves. Now Jack Miller, an electrical engineer who had designed power grids before the invasion, implemented the next phase of humanity's defense. The electromagnetic pulse is calibrated specifically to their power systems, Miller explained to Captain Reed. It won't affect our technology. Reed looked skeptical. That's theoretically impossible. An EMP affects all electronics, Miller smiled. Conventional EMPs, yes. But we're not using conventional physics anymore, Captain. The pulse, when triggered, swept through the battle zone. Human ships continued to function normally, while Drakari vessels went dark. Their backup systems came online within minutes, but those precious moments allowed Earth's defensive fleet to close distance and engage at point-blank range. On the ground, the pattern repeated across battlefields worldwide. Where soldiers had failed through no fault of their courage, engineers turned the tide through applied creativity. Commander Krell, watching his advantages disappear one by one, made a desperate decision. The Drakari had avoided using their planet-killer weapon, partly because they wanted to preserve Earth's resources, and partly because deploying such a weapon would violate treaties with other spacefaring civilizations. But with defeat becoming a possibility for the first time, Krell ordered its activation. The massive weapon began charging, its energy signature detected immediately by Earth's monitoring systems. "They're going to glass the planet," Admiral Watson reported grimly. "Our military options are exhausted." Dr. Foster received the news with surprising calm. "Actually, Admiral, we've been anticipating this. Dr. Rebecca Jones has been working on a solution." Jones, a theoretical physicist who had spent her career studying quantum entanglement, had developed a technology that seemed impossible, a method to redirect energy through dimensional folding. "We can't stop them from firing," she explained, "but we can ensure that when they do, the energy will be channeled back to their own fleet." The Drakari weapon reached full charge. Commander Krell gave the order to fire, confident that this would finally break human resistance. The beam of concentrated energy lanced toward Earth, and then, impossibly, curved back upon itself. The Drakari flagship disintegrated as its own weapon's energy engulfed it. The destruction of the Drakari flagship sent shockwaves through the alien command structure. For the first time in their expansionist history, they had lost a capital ship to an inferior technological civilization. The remaining Drakari forces pulled back to regroup, forming a defensive perimeter beyond the moon's orbit. On Earth, the brief respite allowed for recovery and innovation. Captain Reed toured the MIT facility where Dr. Foster's team worked around the clock. The captain had fought in 3 campaigns against different alien species, but he had never seen anything like the current mobilization of human intellect. "They're adapting to everything we throw at them," Reed observed, watching simulations of the latest Drakari countermeasures. Dr. Foster nodded. "That's the nature of warfare. But there's a fundamental difference in our approaches. The Drakari are soldiers first. They adapt within their military doctrine. We're engineers. We change the rules of engagement entirely." In a demonstration area, Reed watched as Dr. Winters tested a new weapon system. Rather than trying to destroy the nearly impervious Drakari armor, it simply altered local physics to increase friction to impossible levels, effectively immobilizing the aliens. "They can't counter what they don't understand," Winters explained, "and they fundamentally don't understand how we think." The key insight had come from historical analysis. Throughout human history, invading forces had often been technologically superior to defenders. The Mongols had better composite bows and cavalry tactics than their enemies. European colonizers had guns against indigenous weapons. In each case, technological superiority had prevailed, initially. But humans had always excelled at appropriating and improving upon their adversaries' advantages. Now, that same pattern was playing out on a galactic scale. In a bold move, a team led by Martin Green, who had designed waste management systems before the invasion, proposed infiltrating the Drakari ships with modified service drones. These innocuous machines would collect invaluable intelligence while planting devices that could be activated remotely. "It's a modern Trojan horse," Green explained to the skeptical military leadership. "Their automated systems will accept our drones because they're non-weaponized and register as maintenance equipment." The plan worked better than anyone anticipated. Within 48 hours, the drones had mapped the interior layouts of 17 Drakari vessels and gathered crucial data on their technology. More importantly, they had installed microscopic transceivers throughout each ship's vital systems. While the Drakari command debated their next move, another team under Dr. Murray's direction analyzed the alien biology. The Drakari weren't just physically imposing. They had enhanced sensory capabilities that gave them advantages in combat. "Their auditory range is their weakness," Murray announced after completing her analysis. "They can hear frequencies we can't, which gives them an edge in detecting movement. But it also means they're vulnerable to targeted sonic attacks. On the battlefield, the effects of these insights were immediate. When the Drakari launched their counteroffensive against Berlin, they encountered weapons specifically designed to exploit their biological and technological vulnerabilities. Sonic disruptors rendered their elite troops disoriented and nauseated. Targeted electromagnetic fields caused their neural implants to malfunction. And most devastating of all, the remote transceivers planted by Green's drones activated simultaneously, causing cascading system failures throughout their fleet. Commander Krell, watching his invasion force crumble, finally understood what made humans different from the 17 species the Drakari had previously conquered. Other civilizations had fought back with courage, with superior numbers, sometimes even with comparable technology. But none had shown this relentless, creative problem-solving that constantly shifted the parameters of conflict. The humans weren't just fighting, they were innovating faster than the Drakari could adapt. As his command ship lost power and began drifting, Krell made a decision unprecedented in Drakari history. He would negotiate rather than fight to the last soldier. The cost had become too high, the outcome too uncertain. Captain Reed received the communication request with surprise. "They want to talk," he told Admiral Watson. "The Drakari are actually requesting a ceasefire." Watson's expression remained grim. "It could be a trap." "Maybe," Reed acknowledged. "But either way, it means we've accomplished something no other species has managed. We've made the Drakari doubt their victory." The ceasefire negotiations took place on neutral ground, a repurposed space station in lunar orbit. Captain Reed represented Earth's military interests, while Dr. Foster attended as the civilian scientific advisor. The Drakari sent Commander Krell himself, along with their chief technological officer, a sleek alien whose name translated roughly as solver of complex problems. The contrast between the delegations was striking. The Drakari were physically imposing, their militaristic bearing evident in every movement. The humans appeared fragile by comparison, but there was a quiet confidence in their demeanor that puzzled Krell. "Your resistance has been unexpected," Krell began, his translator converting the clicks and whistles of his native language into English. "We wish to understand how a species with inferior military capability has managed to counter our forces so effectively." Dr. Foster exchanged glances with Reed before responding. "Commander, your mistake was in evaluating us by military standards alone. Humanity's strength isn't in our soldiers, though they are brave beyond measure. Our advantage is in how we solve problems." The Drakari technological officer leaned forward with interest. "Explain." "Your species evolved as apex predators," Foster continued. "You developed technology to enhance your natural hunting abilities. We evolved as problem solvers who survived through ingenuity. Our entire civilization is built on engineering solutions to overcome our physical limitations." The negotiations proceeded cautiously. The Drakari, it emerged, had never encountered a species that could reverse engineer their technology so quickly. Other civilizations they had conquered had superior weapons in some cases, but none had demonstrated humanity's lateral thinking and rapid innovation. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the engineering teams weren't resting. They worked under the assumption that the ceasefire was temporary, developing new countermeasures and weapons. The most promising project came from an unexpected source, a team led by Emma Clark, formerly an environmental engineer specializing in terraforming technology. "If we can't match them in conventional warfare, we change the battlefield itself," Clark explained to Admiral Watson. "My team has developed a method to temporarily alter atmospheric conditions in targeted areas. The system could create localized weather events, fog to blind Drakari sensors, electrical storms to disrupt their communications, or pressure differentials that would affect their weapons' accuracy. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, but it would give human forces a critical edge if fighting resumed." In orbit, the negotiations reached a critical point when Krell made a startling admission. "Our conquest of your world would be Pyrrhic, at best. Even if we eventually prevailed through sheer numbers, the cost would be unsustainable." "Then why continue?" Reed asked. "Because retreat is not in our doctrine," Krell replied. "No Drakari commander has ever ordered a full withdrawal." Dr. Foster seized the opportunity. "Perhaps we can offer an alternative that serves both our interests. We've studied your technology extensively during this conflict. We could propose a knowledge exchange instead of continued warfare. The Drakari technological officer clicked rapidly to Krell in their native tongue, clearly excited by the possibility. For a species that prized technological advancement, access to humanity's unique problem-solving approach was potentially more valuable than territorial conquest. As the negotiations progressed, a revelation emerged that changed the dynamic entirely. The Drakari weren't conquering worlds simply for expansion, they were fleeing from something. A greater threat lurked at the edges of their territory, a species so advanced and implacable that even the mighty Drakari feared them. The Voidborn consume everything in their path, Krell explained gravely. We sought your world not merely to conquer, but to establish a buffer zone against their advance. Reed and Foster exchanged alarmed glances. If a species as powerful as the Drakari feared these Voidborn, what chance would humanity have? When will they reach Earth's sector? Foster asked. Based on their current trajectory, within 5 of your years, the Drakari officer replied. The implications were clear. Humanity and the Drakari faced a common enemy, one that neither could defeat alone. The ceasefire negotiations suddenly transformed into discussions of a potential alliance. Reed, the soldier, understood the military necessity. Foster, the engineer, saw the technological possibilities of combining human innovation with Drakari resources. We've been fighting the wrong war, Foster said quietly to Reed as the Drakari delegations conferred among themselves. This isn't about defending Earth anymore. It's about saving both our species. The ceasefire between humans and Drakari became the first step toward an unprecedented intergalactic alliance, one forged not through friendship or shared values, but through the most powerful motivator of all: survival. The alliance between humanity and the Drakari was formalized 3 months after the ceasefire. Neither species fully trusted the other, but the looming threat of the Voidborn made cooperation a necessity rather than a choice. The Galactic Confederation headquarters on Earth became the central command for the Joint Defense Initiative. Admiral Watson stood before the combined council of human and Drakari leaders, presenting the grim intelligence. The Voidborn have accelerated their expansion. New projections indicate they'll reach our space within 3 years, not 5. The news sent a ripple of clicking sounds through the Drakari representatives, their equivalent of concerned murmuring. Our conventional forces cannot stop them, Commander Krell stated bluntly. The Voidborn consume energy directly. Weapons only feed their advance. Dr. Foster, now heading the Joint Research Division, stepped forward. Then we don't fight them conventionally. We need to understand what they are before we can determine how to counter them. The following months saw an unprecedented collaboration between human engineers and Drakari technical specialists. The cultural differences created friction. Drakari approached problems with methodical, hierarchical thinking, while humans tended toward creative leaps and unconventional solutions. But gradually, these differences became complementary rather than contradictory. In orbit around Jupiter, a massive research station was constructed to study Voidborn samples that the Drakari had collected during previous encounters. Dr. Winters led the physics team, working alongside the Drakari scientist known as Solver. They're not truly alive in any conventional sense, Winters explained during a briefing. The Voidborn exist partially in our dimension, and partially in what we can only describe as subspace. That's why energy weapons are ineffective. The energy is shunted into another dimension where it actually strengthens them. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Ben Harris had been a quantum computing specialist before the Drakari invasion. His understanding of dimensional data storage led to a critical insight. If the Voidborn exist partially in subspace, Harris proposed, then we can develop a way to collapse the dimensional bridge they use to maintain their existence in our reality. The theory was sound, but implementing it required technology beyond what either humans or Drakari possessed individually. Together, however, they began developing a network of dimensional anchors, devices that could stabilize local spacetime and prevent the Voidborn from maintaining their transdimensional state. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Murray's team worked on biological countermeasures. The Voidborn weren't traditionally biological, but they interacted with organic matter in predictable ways when consuming planets. We can't poison them conventionally, Murray explained to a joint military council. But we can create biological systems that are indigestible to them. essentially making our worlds less nutritionally valuable targets. The preparation for the coming conflict transformed human society. The petty national differences that had divided humanity for millennia faded in importance as the species united against an existential threat. Engineers and scientists, once relegated to support roles in military planning, now found themselves directing humanity's survival strategy. Captain Reed, promoted to admiral following Watson's retirement, oversaw the deployment of the first dimensional anchor prototypes around Neptune as an early warning system. The Drakari, meanwhile, retrofitted their fleet with technology developed by the joint research teams. "It's ironic," Reed commented to Dr. Foster as they observed the construction. "If the Drakari hadn't invaded, we might never have accelerated our technology enough to have a chance against the Voidborn." Foster nodded thoughtfully. "Conflict drives innovation, but collaboration multiplies it." The first contact with Voidborn scouts occurred near Pluto's orbit, earlier than anyone had anticipated. A small Drakari patrol encountered 3 of the entities, described in reports as shifting voids in space, absorbing light and matter alike. The dimensional anchors worked partially, preventing the Voidborn from fully materializing. But the encounter revealed a troubling development. The Voidborn were adapting, learning to stabilize their presence despite the human Drakari countermeasures. In an emergency session of the Joint Command, Commander Krell delivered the sobering news. "The Voidborn main force is accelerating toward our system. At current speeds, they will reach Earth in less than 6 months." The timeline had collapsed from years to months. Humanity and the Drakari now faced a choice: attempt evacuation to distant systems, or make a stand against an enemy that had never been defeated. Dr. Foster looked around the room at the assembled leaders, human and alien alike. "We're not ready for a direct confrontation," he admitted. "But we have something the Voidborn haven't encountered before: a unified front of Drakari strength and human ingenuity." The decision was unanimous. They would stand and fight, not because victory was certain, but because the alternative, fleeing deeper into the galaxy, would only delay the inevitable. As the meeting adjourned, Commander Krell approached Foster privately. "In all our conquests," the Drakari leader admitted, "we never truly understood why some species were more formidable than others. Now I see that true power lies not in the strength of soldiers, but in the minds of those who arm them." Foster offered a grim smile. "Let's hope that's enough against an enemy that defies conventional understanding." The greatest engineering challenge in human history had begun, with the fate of 2 civilizations hanging in the balance. The Voidborn arrived at the edge of the solar system exactly as predicted. Early detection systems captured their approach, a spreading darkness that consumed the light of distant stars, like an ink blot spreading across the cosmos. Pluto's monitoring station transmitted data for 17 minutes before going silent. In the war room beneath Geneva, Admiral Reed watched the tactical displays with Dr. Foster and Commander Krell. Their combined fleet, human and Drakari, ships integrated with the latest dimensional technology, formed a defensive perimeter around Earth and Mars. "Neptune's dimensional anchor grid is online," Lieutenant Gray reported. "Energy readings show it's affecting the Voidborn advance. They're slowing to navigate around the disruption field." It was the first positive sign in this conflict. The anchors, based on Harris's quantum theories and built with Drakari manufacturing techniques, were creating zones where the Voidborn couldn't fully manifest. "The anchors won't stop them," Foster cautioned. "But they're forcing the Voidborn to remain more fully in our dimension to progress." Krell's mandibles clicked in what the humans had learned was an expression of grim satisfaction. "Which makes them vulnerable to our conventional weapons." The battle for the outer planets lasted 3 weeks. Jupiter's moons fell one by one, each defensive position buying time for the inner system to strengthen its preparations. The combined fleet fought with desperate courage, but the Voidborn advanced inexorably, absorbing energy weapons and shrugging off physical projectiles. But with each engagement, the joint human-Drakari science teams gathered more data. Dr. Winters and Solver worked continuously, refining their understanding of Voidborn physics. "They're not invincible," Winters announced during an emergency briefing. "When forced to fully materialize in our dimension, they have to maintain a complex quantum state that's inherently unstable. If we can disrupt that state at precisely the right frequency..." The insight led to a new weapon: a quantum destabilizer that could, in theory, unravel a void-born entity entirely. The technology was untested, experimental, and required enormous power to operate. Worse, it had a limited range, meaning ships would need to engage the Voidborn at dangerously close distances. As the Voidborn fleet approached Mars, humanity and the Drakari prepared for what might be their final stand. The red planet had been transformed into a fortress, its orbit lined with dimensional anchors and the new quantum destabilizers. Admiral Reed addressed the combined fleet from the flagship Defiance. "We know their weaknesses now. We have the technology to fight them. This is where we hold the line, not just for Earth or the Drakari homeworld, but for all life in this galaxy." The Battle of Mars began at dawn, Earth time. The Voidborn, a swarm of darkness against the stars, encountered the dimensional anchor grid and were forced to slow their advance. As they concentrated their effort on breaking through, the combined fleet launched its counterattack. The first quantum destabilizer shots found their marks. Voidborn entities collapsed in flashes of multidimensional energy, their very existence unraveling as their quantum states destabilized. For the first time in recorded history, the Voidborn were taking losses, but the victory was far from assured. The destabilizers required precise targeting and enormous energy. Each shot drained a capital ship's power reserves, leaving it vulnerable until systems could recharge. The Voidborn, sensing this weakness, began targeting ships immediately after. They fired. The tide turned when Dr. Murray's biological countermeasure was deployed. Specialized drones released engineered microorganisms that spread throughout the battlefield. The Voidborn, attempting to consume these particles as they did, all matter, found themselves unable to process the specifically designed molecular structures. "They're slowing down," Gray reported, excitement breaking through her professional demeanor. "The bioagents are forcing them to expend more energy to maintain cohesion." The combined effect of the dimensional anchors, quantum destabilizers, and biological agents created the perfect storm against the Voidborn. For every ship lost in the human Drakari fleet, dozens of Voidborn entities were destroyed. In the midst of battle, Dr. Foster worked with Harris and a team of Drakari specialists on the final component of their defense, a dimensional inversion device that would create a localized subspace fold, effectively creating a one-way gate that would trap the Voidborn between dimensions. "It's ready," Foster announced as the battle reached its critical point. "But someone needs to deliver it to the center of the Voidborn formation." Commander Krell volunteered without hesitation. "My flagship has the strongest shields. We can penetrate their formation and deploy the device." The Drakari command ship, accompanied by a squadron of human fighters, punched through the Voidborn lines in a maneuver that defied conventional tactics. They sustained heavy damage but reached the deployment coordinates. "Dimensional inversion device is active," Krell reported, his transmission breaking up through interference. "Subspace fold is forming. We won't be able to escape its radius." Admiral Reed watched the tactical display as the device activated. A sphere of distorted space expanded from the Drakari flagship's position, engulfing hundreds of Voidborn entities and Commander Krell's ship. The battlefield fell silent as the subspace fold collapsed upon itself, taking a significant portion of the Voidborn fleet with it. The remaining entities, suddenly cut off from their main force, began to destabilize and retreat. The Battle of Mars was over. Humanity and the Drakari had achieved what no other civilization had managed. They had defeated the Voidborn. In the aftermath, as reconstruction began and the wounded were tended to, Dr. Foster stood with Admiral Reed in the observation dome of the Mars Command Center, looking up at the stars. "It wasn't the strength of our ships or the courage of our soldiers that won this war," Foster reflected. "It was our ability to understand, adapt, and create solutions to problems that seemed insurmountable." Reed nodded. "The Drakari invaded because they believed military might was the ultimate power in the universe. They learned otherwise when they faced human engineers. And we learned that even our greatest enemies can become allies when facing extinction," Foster added. "Commander Krell died saving two civilizations that were at war just months ago." As news of the victory spread throughout human and Drakari space, a new understanding emerged. The future of both species, indeed, of all intelligent life, would depend not on those who could fight the hardest, but on those who could solve the most difficult problems. Throughout the galaxy, a new saying began to circulate. attributed to Commander Krell in his final transmission. Fear not the soldier with a weapon, but the engineer who designed it. The alliance between humans and Drakari, forged in desperation, now had the opportunity to evolve into something more profound. A civilization that valued innovation above conquest, collaboration above domination. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the remaining Voidborn retreated, carrying with them the knowledge that they had finally encountered a force they could not overcome. The combined ingenuity of two species who had learned that the greatest weapon in the universe was not force, but understanding. In the end, it wasn't superior firepower that saved the galaxy. It was the quiet work of engineers who refused to accept impossibility, who looked at the darkness between stars and said, "We can solve this," and they did.